All right, let's dig into this. Welcome back to Deep Dive. Today we're cutting through the relentless stream of information to bring you a sharp, thoroughly dissected understanding of the complex pressures currently shaping Russia. This isn't just about what's happening on the surface. It's about discerning the strategic objectives, the operational details, and, the often unseen vulnerabilities. Our mission here is to give you that essential shortcut to being truly well-informed without getting completely swamped by the sheer volume of data out there. We've pulled from a really diverse and I think deeply analytical range of sources for this deep dive, everything from granular reports on domestic governance failures and significant economic shifts, to the direct and frankly at times brutal impacts of ongoing international conflicts and the state's own internal security measures. It's a highly complex operational picture, and we're here to help you identify the critical interconnected threads that define it.
Yes, and what's acutely clear here, really from a strategic standpoint, is the profound paradox Russia currently confronts. It's quite striking. On one flank, you have these undeniable, significant internal structural weaknesses, and we're talking about tangible operational failures, things as fundamental as natural disaster response, and very real economic strains that are directly impacting the citizenry. You can see it on the ground. Simultaneously, and you could argue in direct response, the state is aggressively tightening its internal control mechanisms, implementing really stringent security measures and ideological suppression. It's a clampdown. So the immediate situational clarity is this. Russia is navigating an extremely complex, multi-domain operational landscape, no doubt about it. This environment is characterized by, escalating societal discontent. You see hints of it. There are acute economic pressure points that ripple through critical industries, and constantly evolving security dynamics, all under the inescapable and direct shadow of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. That hangs over everything. Our analysis today will precisely zero in on these critical areas. We'll examine the internal vulnerabilities, governance, the economy, the environment, and juxtapose those with the state's external and internal security responses. That includes things like tightening border control, aggressive information suppression, and critically, their approach to military personnel management. That's a key piece. This deep dive will systematically reveal how these seemingly disparate elements are not isolated incidents at all. They're deeply interconnected threads that collectively define the current strategic and operational environment, influencing Russia's overall capacity and, its trajectory.
That sets the strategic parameters perfectly. And as we begin our full spectrum analysis, what really stands out when we discuss those internal vulnerabilities? Where do we start? We're going to start by assessing the foundational elements of internal stability, specifically examining the societal and economic front. What are the day-to-day realities and the underlying systemic challenges that are creating such profound strain within Russia right now?
Precisely. From an operational perspective, let's commence by analyzing the internal governance framework, specifically its capacity to manage widespread recurring crises, because that's what we're seeing. The intelligence indicates a pattern of widespread and, frankly, severe natural disasters, particularly seasonal floods and wildfires. These are not isolated anomalies, not one-offs. They are a recurring operational challenge that systematically diverts critical resources, money, personnel, attention. It all gets pulled away. This year alone, as of March 28, a full 12 Russian regions have already experienced significant flooding. 12. This is not merely an environmental issue, you see. It is a critical infrastructure problem. It's a resource management problem, and fundamentally, it's a state legitimacy problem. It speaks to a basic inability to anticipate, mitigate, and respond effectively to these predictable seasonal threats.
And it's not just the frequency, is it? It's the sheer scale and the human impact. We're seeing truly devastating examples. Like the Tyumen region currently bracing for the Ishim River floods. Predictions are saying water levels could exceed all previous records. That threatens entire communities. Then you have the Orenburg region, remember last spring, catastrophic floods there. The official figures, which were controversially deleted later from the Emergencies Ministry website, cited 15 confirmed deaths, over 311,000 people directly impacted, and nearly 18,000 rescued from their homes. These aren't minor inconveniences. These are major humanitarian and logistical challenges. They demand a robust, coordinated federal response, which, well, it seems to be lacking.
Exactly. Lacking is the word.
And it keeps happening. The Sverdlovsk region was hit by floods and is now preparing for wildfires, so a double threat scenario there. Even in the Irkutsk region, hundreds of homeowners were affected. The village of Komatovo was apparently submerged within an hour, just gone underwater that quickly. That's a shockingly rapid inundation. It catches residents completely off guard. It really paints a picture of constant, overwhelming crisis, stretching resources thin, probably past their limits.
The operational implications of these events are substantial. They indicate severe deficiencies in civil defense, in disaster preparedness across the board. Local officials consistently appear ill-prepared, overwhelmed. You observe these almost desperate attempts to erect temporary earthen embankments in places like Ishim, often manually, with shovels. The mayor of Ishim himself, Fyodor Shishkin, admitted they cannot afford to relax given the expected unprecedented high water levels. That tells you something. This is not a sustainable strategy. It's not effective preemptive disaster mitigation. It's reactive, often futile, a last-ditch effort when the water's already rising. Furthermore, the state's response to the inevitable public discontent highlights a critical vulnerability: their narrative control, their transparency or lack thereof. There are concerted efforts to deflate the actual extent of the damage reported, and crucially, to shift blame, often upwards towards Moscow. The head of Komotovo, Alexander Ivanenko, for instance, explicitly blamed federal authorities, said there was a perennial lack of financial means for essential drainage systems. That points directly to a breakdown in federal-regional coordination and fundamentally resource allocation. Where's the money going?
And that information control aspect you mentioned, it's particularly stark when we look at how these crises get reported internally, isn't it? In Orenburg, officials initially insisted there were no fatalities, 0, despite independent journalists on the ground confirming at least 7 deaths through their own investigations. They were finding bodies. Then, the official confirmation of 15 deaths pops up, only to be quickly and permanently deleted from the Emergencies Ministry website. Just gone. That kind of glaring discrepancy between the official story and the reality people are seeing, that's not just a crack. It's a profound fracture in public trust, in the government's credibility.
A major fracture.
It makes you wonder, if they're willing to go to such lengths to control the narrative around natural disasters, what does that imply for how they manage information related to the ongoing conflict? It suggests a pattern. We even saw direct worker discontent. Sverdlovsk firefighters, right? The guys on the front lines of these disasters, they went on strike last year. Why? Chronically low salaries, abysmal working conditions, and a stark lack of essential equipment. Basic stuff. And this was right at the height of wildfire season. That directly compromises their operational capability, surely.
It absolutely does. It directly impacts critical response capabilities, personnel morale. It creates systemic vulnerabilities right where you need strength. And the public sentiment, you could see it bubbling up. Comments on platforms like VKontakte, which is Russia's big social media network, like their Facebook, regarding incidents like the Asha Dam, they indicate a pervasive loss of trust. One user's comment really stuck with me. When the water came, you were claiming there were errors, but now you claim that everything is stable. Well, that was fast. That powerfully implies systemic corruption, doesn't it? A cynical manipulation of facts. People see through it. So for you, the strategic thinker listening, this highlights a significant domestic vulnerability. It's a direct challenge to the perceived competence, the effectiveness, and the centralized control of Russian authority, especially when they're confronted with these large-scale recurring environmental threats that demand effective, transparent, and frankly, uncorrupted governance. This erosion of internal stability impacts their ability to project national power. It impacts their ability to sustain prolonged external efforts. It diverts resources, it saps morale, and it exposes fundamental weaknesses in the state's capacity to protect its own citizens.
Okay, so we've seen how the state struggles to manage these internal crises. It diverts critical resources, erodes public trust, often using, let's say, questionable information management tactics. But what happens when those already strained resources and that dwindling public trust are then put under intense economic pressure? This brings us directly to the tightening economic squeeze facing average Russians and also their industries. This is another area revealing profound pressure points and, I think, significant strategic challenges.
Yes, the immediate operational concern here, from the state's perspective, is revenue generation, fiscal consolidation in what is essentially a wartime economy. There's new legislation, currently pending signature, which would allow tax authorities to recover debts directly from citizens' bank accounts without a court order, effective November 1st, potentially. Now, this capability, it was previously reserved exclusively for businesses, for legal entities, but now it's being extended to private individuals for income tax, transport tax, property taxes, fees, insurance contributions, the works. While individuals theoretically retain a 30-day window to challenge the demand, the mechanism is automated. If there aren't enough funds in the account, bailiffs are then authorized to seize other assets, cars, property, whatever they can find. The finance ministry, they project this aggressive maneuver could generate an additional 22.5 billion rubles. That's roughly $287.5 million for the state budget.
That's certainly a notable sum, and yes, it undeniably streamlines collection, as Nikita Chaplin from the Duma's Budget and Taxes Committee pointed out. Cuts out the courts, speeds things up. But this isn't just about streamlining collection, is it? It feels like a stark, almost desperate signal. It reveals a state so acutely strained by the conflict's financial demands that it's willing to sacrifice what many would see as a long-held principle of individual due process, effectively bypassing the courts to directly tap into citizens' bank accounts. It raises immediate, profound concerns about individual rights. And the potential for error, huge. Both the Communist and the Liberal New People parties are criticizing it vehemently. They're arguing it fundamentally violates constitutional rights. And you have financial analysts like Vladimir Chernoff warning of indiscriminate automated decisions that fail to consider individual circumstances. That could lead to widespread grievances, surely, especially when you consider that 23 million Russians, nearly a quarter of the working-age population, currently owe taxes. That's a massive segment potentially hit by this dramatic shift in how the state interacts financially with its citizens.
This maneuver is a clear, high-level indication of the state's urgent need for funds. You can directly attribute it to the substantial financial outlays required for the ongoing conflict and, of course, the cumulative effects of international sanctions. It represents a strategic prioritization. State fiscal needs are being placed above individual due process, above potential social friction. That's the calculus here. While it might be efficient for immediate revenue collection, it carries inherent risks. Escalating societal discontent, a further erosion of public trust in state institutions, these are real possibilities. This is a strategic objective. Consolidate financial resources by any means necessary, even if it means alienating a significant portion of the population. It speaks volumes about the true escalating costs they're incurring to sustain operations in Ukraine and elsewhere.
And it's not just individuals feeling this financial squeeze, right? The construction sector, always a vital component of any economy, a key indicator of internal development, is reportedly facing an unprecedented wave of bankruptcies, predicted by the end of next year. Alexei Krapovin, the CEO of Natsprextroy, one of Russia's largest construction holdings, he states it unequivocally. The central bank's 20% key interest rate is systematically choking access to capital for these companies. It's fundamentally crippling their operational capacity.
This is a direct, measurable operational impact of macroeconomic policy. It reveals a critical vulnerability in the real economy, not just numbers on a page. Krapovin's assessment is stark, unambiguous. He says, every company, without exception, is feeling the impact of expensive capital. Think about what a 20% key interest rate actually means for a business that typically operates on razor-thin margins, like construction often does. For a construction company, even a short-term loan becomes prohibitively expensive. This isn't just about expensive capital. It means the cost of financing new projects, buying essential materials, even just servicing existing debts. It immediately outstrips any potential profit margin.
So the math just doesn't work anymore.
Exactly. If you're building residential properties, say with a typical 9–10% profit margin, borrowing money at 20% makes the project financially unviable from day one, before you even break ground. Road construction, even tighter margin, maybe 2–3%. That faces an even more impossible scenario. It creates an almost mathematical certainty of failure for new ventures.
Right.
And it's its immense strain on ongoing projects. It leads to a paralysis in development, in infrastructure maintenance. Large infrastructure projects, the kind that are capital-intensive and span years, they're simply not viable under these conditions without massive targeted state intervention. Subsidies, guarantees, something. Mathematically, as you say, it's more lucrative right now to put money in a high-interest savings account than to invest it in a productive enterprise like building something. This signals a major challenge to internal development, job creation, the maintenance of vital infrastructure. It directly compromises Russia's long-term strategic capacity and the quality of life for its citizens. Without significant sustained state support and a clear medium-term infrastructure plan with fixed funding and, crucially, early payments to help cash flow, the industry faces severe contraction, possibly irreversible contraction in some areas.
And speaking of unusual financial indicators in this strained landscape, there's another data point. The recent sale of a 5% stake in Sovcombank, that's one of Russia's largest banks. It sold for $216 million, but surprisingly, it appeared on the Avito online marketplace, which is, Russia's huge classified site like eBay or Craigslist. Not exactly the usual place for multi-million-dollar bank stakes. The owner, Mikhail Klokin, was sanctioned by the U.S. back in March 2022. Analysts are describing this as highly unusual, especially since the significant stake has reportedly been on the market for a while, priced above value, and it offers no real management influence. It's not a controlling stake. Definitely not typical for a major banking asset sale. What does that tell us?
This transaction, particularly its, let's say, unconventional method of sale, points directly and unequivocally to the profound impact of international sanctions, both on high-net-worth individuals and, critically, it suggests a pressing need for liquidity, cash. The fact that such a substantial asset, a stake in a major financial institution, is being marketed on a public online platform like Avito, it underscores the extreme difficulties of divesting sanctioned assets through conventional, legitimate financial channels. Those channels are largely closed off. It's a clear signal of either financial desperation on the part of the seller or perhaps an attempt at circumvention, finding a buyer outside the normal scrutiny. It also reflects the broader economic strains on the banking sector itself. Sovcombank reported a significant 19% decline in net profit last year, so the underlying asset isn't exactly booming either. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these economic maneuvers, the aggressive tax collection, the construction sector's potential collapse, this unconventional bank stake sale, they reveal the acute pressure points on Russia's financial system and its real economy. These are not isolated incidents. They are clear indicators of systemic strain that directly influence Russia's strategic capacity to sustain prolonged military efforts, both internally and externally. It demonstrates how external pressure, like sanctions, translates into tangible, destabilizing domestic economic consequences. It affects everything from critical infrastructure development to overall financial stability, ultimately impacting Russia's long-term resilience. Now, let's shift our focus a bit towards the direct echoes of the conflict in Ukraine itself, examining how the war is profoundly impacting internal Russian society and, importantly, its strategic posture. This raises a really important operational question. How are military personnel being managed, sustained, and frankly controlled in this high-stakes environment? Our assessment indicates significant challenges here, both in personnel retention and in information management.
That's a crucial pivot. And we start with the personnel challenges and the human cost. This is where the direct impact on individual soldiers becomes painfully clear, isn't it? Consider the case of Semyon Subotin. He's a former Russian soldier, apparently from the Strategic Missile Forces, no less. He fled to Armenia in September 2024 after being placed on Russia's wanted list for desertion.
Let's unpack this with operational clarity. Subotin's situation highlights a critical systemic challenge: military desertion within the Russian force structure. And it also shows the complexities of international legal norms that directly impinge on Moscow's ability to maintain troop strength and discipline. Armenian police actively prevented Russian military officials from just grabbing him off the street. They unequivocally demanded a formal extradition request. Following protocol, Russia subsequently failed to submit one. This immediately escalated. Human rights groups raised alarms about a potential kidnapping attempt by Russian agents on sovereign Armenian territory. As of now, Subotin remains free in Armenia.
So Armenia pushed back.
They did, and this isn't an isolated incident. We have observed similar friction points before. Remember Yuri Trostyansky? His extradition from Armenia was rejected back in 2023. Conversely, another Russian, Dmitry Setrikov, was seized and repatriated by Russian military police operating in Armenia. That prompted strong condemnation from Armenian officials, like Ambassador Tigran Balayan. So this demonstrates not only a persistent internal personnel retention problem for the Russian military soldiers voting with their feet, but it also creates significant friction points in regional relations. With Armenia, nominally a key strategic partner within the CSTO, this friction directly impacts force posture, logistics, overall operational readiness. Units face continuous personnel flight, and now there are these diplomatic complications layered on top.
Amidst these troubling individual stories of desertion and the diplomatic friction, we are also seeing some practical, albeit limited, areas of cooperation between Russia and Ukraine, specifically body and prisoner exchanges. Russia recently returned the bodies of 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers. In return, they received 19 Russian soldiers. This was apparently part of a deal that emerged from those Istanbul peace talks a while back. The stark photos show the transfer of body bags, a grim testament to the human cost. An anonymous source indicated that maybe 2,000 more Ukrainian bodies are slated to be returned.
These exchanges, which were initially agreed upon in Istanbul for, I believe, 6,000 bodies each, plus large-scale prisoner swaps, even though there was no broader ceasefire, they represent a pragmatic operational necessity. This is a logistical and humanitarian imperative that both sides, regardless of the ongoing strategic conflict, acknowledge. It's a fundamental requirement for managing the sheer human cost of prolonged warfare like this. It signifies a limited, tactical-level cooperation, born of sheer necessity, you could say. Regardless of the broader geopolitical objectives, it's a necessary friction point reduction mechanism in an otherwise deeply attritional conflict.
But then there's a deeply concerning twist in how Russia apparently manages its own return personnel. Families of Russian POWs are accusing Moscow of immediately redeploying their loved ones back to combat zones after these prisoner swaps. This seems to directly, unequivocally, violate Article 117 of the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War. That article expressly states that no repatriated person may be employed on active military service. Seems pretty clear.
This alleged redeployment is a critical operational, ethical, and legal issue, and it speaks directly to Russia's manpower crisis. It's a huge indicator. It reveals severe, pressing manpower needs within the Russian military, and it suggests a potential, perhaps deliberate disregard for established international conventions, which carries significant legal and reputational risk on the global stage. We have documented cases that illustrate this pattern quite clearly. Consider Mikhail Surikov. Signed a contract, reportedly out of foolishness, needed the money, got captured, returned in a swap, and was then directly sent back to the front lines, where he was killed. Sent right back, right back. Or Kirill Putintsev, recruited from prison for a theft charge, fought, captured, returned via swap, then sent back to active service, suffered a severe nervous breakdown, according to reports, and was subsequently sent to a psychiatric hospital. Then there's Vasily Grigoriev and Dmitry Davidov, mobilized soldiers, captured, swapped, then redeployed to the Kharkiv front, ostensibly for evacuating wounded and dead personnel. They subsequently escaped their unit and sought legal aid, refusing to return to combat. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry's argument, their justification, is that these soldiers didn't fall into specific categories requiring direct, indefinite repatriation, like being terminally wounded or ill or having severely diminished capacities. They seem to be implying that able-bodied returnees are still considered deployable, still under contract. This interpretation is highly contentious under international law, to say the least.
It certainly sounds like a loophole argument.
It does. Conversely, Ukrainian President Zelensky has explicitly signed a law exempting former POWs from future mobilization. That demonstrates a very different approach to personnel welfare and adherence to international legal frameworks. A clear contrast. Human rights groups like Ide Lesum, which translates to get lost or go through the forest, and Citizen Army Rights, they are receiving numerous credible complaints about these redeployed POWs. Russian authorities continue to treat them as active duty soldiers, subject to orders, despite their experiences and the clear Geneva Convention prohibitions. So what does this tell us? What does it mean for you? You're witnessing the profound, tangible human cost of prolonged conflict, reflected not just on the battlefield casualties, but in policy decisions that directly affect soldiers' lives, compromise force morale, and significantly impact Russia's standing on the international legal stage. This demonstrates a strategic calculus. It prioritizes immediate manpower needs and operational sustainment over adherence to established international norms and, arguably, the basic welfare of its own troops. Now, moving to Russia's defensive posture and their broader information warfare strategies. What truly stands out here is the escalating operational impact of Ukrainian drone attacks, particularly on civilian infrastructure deep inside Russia, specifically targeting Moscow airports. Over 1,000 flights were delayed or canceled over a single weekend. That was July 19th to 21st, 2025, severely affecting Sheremetyevo, Vutovo, Domodedovo, and Tukhovsky airports, all the major Moscow hubs. This isn't mere harassment. It's a systematic disruption campaign.
It's incredible to comprehend that level of sustained disruption right in the capital. The Russian Defense Ministry has been reporting shooting down drones almost daily, like 18 one day, then 26, then 23 in a row over that weekend. This carpet plan, that's their code for emergency airspace closure protocol, it's been triggered so frequently, get this. Major Moscow airports have cumulatively exceeded 24 hours of total closures over just the past 3 months. Domodedovo alone faced over 60 hours of downtime. 60 hours. The Association of Tour Operators of Russia, ATOR, they calculated that since early May, 1,000 flights have been canceled outright, 430 diverted, and a staggering 200,000 passengers have been directly affected. Imagine the chaos. Yet despite these mounting economic losses and public inconvenience, the state aviation authority, Rosaviatsia, has explicitly stated there are no plans to compensate the airlines. None. The new transportation minister, Andrei Nikitin, acknowledged the inherent unpredictability but clearly stated safety remains the absolute top priority, above all else. This illustrates a severe and persistent operational challenge for them.
It absolutely does. This illustrates a critical asymmetric capability being employed by Ukraine, and it represents a significant ongoing defensive challenge for Russia, right within its own strategic depth, the capital region. The operational objective of these drone attacks seems clear. Systematically disrupt normal civilian life, impose measurable economic costs on airlines and the broader economy, and force the Russian state to continuously allocate valuable advanced air defense resources to homeland defense, diverting them from the front lines or other strategic areas. Russia's consistent response prioritizing security over economic compensation, repeatedly triggering the carpet plan, it demonstrates the state's unwavering emphasis on maintaining control and projecting resilience, even at the cost of significant economic disruption and widespread public inconvenience. This is a direct measure of the effectiveness of Ukraine's evolving drone technology and tactics, and it highlights Russia's urgent need for robust, dynamic, and integrated air defense systems within its operational framework, especially around key population centers and critical infrastructure. It reflects a strategic imperative to protect these areas from persistent, relatively low-cost attacks.
And in parallel with these air defense responses, we're seeing an intensification of security measures elsewhere, particularly at ports. President Putin recently signed an executive order. It requires FSB security clearance for all ships arriving from foreign ports and intending to enter Russian ports, all of them. This order took immediate effect, and it explicitly cites wartime legal conditions as the justification.
Yes, that FSB port clearance order is a direct, immediate security measure. Implemented clearly at the highest levels, it's designed to counter perceived maritime threats to critical infrastructure and logistics hubs. It's explicitly linked to the heightened security posture following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and also linked to the observed increase in Ukrainian attacks, not just drones on airfields, but also strategic rail infrastructure bombings, sabotage attempts. The Financial Times even reported speculation about a highly coordinated Ukrainian sabotage campaign, potentially targeting Russia's Shadow Fleet, those tankers used to circumvent oil sanctions. They specifically noted 5 ships had visited Russian ports shortly before suffering mysterious incidents at sea.
Ah, interesting connection.
Potentially. So this executive order reflects a deeper, top-down institutionalization of wartime security protocols. It directly affects commercial shipping, complicates logistics, impacts overall maritime domain awareness for Russia, and could potentially throttle international trade flows, at least temporarily or by adding friction. It represents a clear directive within the command hierarchy. Enhance operational security against potential maritime infiltration or sabotage, ensure control over these strategic choke points.
And beyond the physical security, there's this significant, almost obsessive focus on information control and countering perceived foreign influence. Russia recently designated Yale University as an undesirable organization. This was just this month, July 2025. That move puts Yale's faculty, its administration, even its students at direct risk of criminal prosecution if they engage with Russian citizens or entities inside Russia. Brigham Young University was similarly banned in June. And Bard College, they were one of the first, banned back in 2021.
The designation of these prominent foreign universities as undesirable organizations is a clear, aggressive facet of Russia's internal information control strategy. It's also a strategic defensive measure against perceived foreign influence, or any form of intellectual dissent that might challenge the state narrative. It specifically targets educational institutions that promote ideas seen as challenging or antithetical to the Kremlin's worldview. Liberal arts, critical thinking, academic freedom itself. The Undesirables Law, which was enacted back in 2015, carries severe penalties. It's designed explicitly to create a chilling effect. Founding or leading a banned organization can get you 6 years in prison. Repeated involvement or even just sharing their content online can lead to substantial fines and up to 4 years in prison.
Just for sharing content?
Potentially, yes, under repeat offenses. The stated rationale for banning Yale, according to the Prosecutor General's office, included accusations of training opposition leaders, specifically citing members of Alexei Navalny's groups and providing justifications for international sanctions. Bard College, for its part, theorized its ban was due to its association with George Soros's Open Society Foundation itself, deemed undesirable long ago, and a perceived threat from liberal arts education and academic freedom. These are seen as inherently subversive concepts by the current regime. As political scientist Daniel Treisman at UCLA put it quite incisively, the point of the law is to scare people, and the vagueness is deliberate. It forces Russians to worry about any contacts they may have with Westerners or Western ideas. That uncertainty breeds self-censorship.
And we've seen very real, devastating consequences for individuals caught up in this crackdown. An American professor who worked at St. Petersburg State University, Michael Fries, was deported simply because of his past connections with Bard College. Sasha Skochilenko, an alumna of the Bard Smolny program in St. Petersburg, was imprisoned. Her crime: replacing supermarket price tags with facts about the invasion of Ukraine. A tiny act of protest met with years in prison. It's a stark illustration of the extreme intolerance for dissent And it's not just foreign academics or activists. Russian academics themselves are being targeted, especially for foreign research collaboration. Look at the horrifying case of aerospace scientist Valery Golubkin, sentenced to 12 years for treason, for allegedly sharing supposedly public, non-classified information with foreign entities. It demonstrates a deep-seated paranoia, a systematic suppression of independent thought and international collaboration.
Absolutely. This escalating crackdown on intellectual freedom, on academic collaboration, on international ties, it's a critical component of Russia's internal information warfare doctrine. It's not separate from the kinetic war. It's part of the same overall strategy. It aims to systematically eliminate perceived ideological threats, rigidly control all narratives within the country, and prevent the spread of dissenting viewpoints, particularly those that originate from or are seen as influenced by Western institutions or ideas. The deliberate vagueness of the undesirables law maximizes its chilling effect, as Treisman noted. It makes almost any collaboration with Western institutions or even just engagement with Western ideas a potential criminal act. It forces academics, students, NGOs, everyone to self-censor constantly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these comprehensive measures, from the air defense responses to persistent drone attacks to the tightening of port security and these severe legal crackdowns on academia and free thought, they illustrate Russia's multifaceted, integrated approach. They're managing both direct military threats and profound internal ideological challenges simultaneously. The strategic objective is unequivocal: maintain absolute internal stability and control over the population, silence dissent, even as the nation is engaged in a deeply attritional external conflict. This directly impacts Russia's long-term intellectual capital, its capacity for indigenous innovation, its future connection to global knowledge networks, and ultimately its future standing on the global stage. There are long-term costs here.
So what does this all tell us, then, about Russia's strategic posture right now? As we conclude this deep dive, it's clear we've examined a nation operating under immense multifaceted pressure, both internal and external. It's coming from all sides, from the repeated and very public failures in managing catastrophic natural disasters, the severe economic strains impacting individual citizens and key industries like construction, to the profound human costs we see in military personnel management, the desertions, the alleged POW redeployments, and then this aggressive tightening of information and ideological control, banning universities, prosecuting dissent. We've seen a complex, interconnected interplay. Military actions, economic health, societal well-being, and state control, they are all intrinsically linked. It reveals Russia's monumental challenges in maintaining internal stability and cohesion while simultaneously prosecuting a major external conflict. It's a difficult balancing act.
It is. And this raises a critical strategic question for you, the listener, to consider. How did these deep internal dynamics, everything we've discussed, the mismanagement of natural disasters, the tightening economic screws on its own citizens, the systemic challenges in military personnel management, the broad suppression of academic freedom and independent thought, how did these factors collectively impact a nation's long-term resilience, its capacity for strategic endurance, particularly in a prolonged conflict? And what does it mean for its overall strategic trajectory on the global stage? What is the true, perhaps hidden, cost of prioritizing external aggression in military, might seemingly at the expense of internal stability, societal welfare, and fundamental freedoms? The ability to sustain prolonged strategic operations depends not just on kinetic military might, on tanks and missiles. Fundamentally, it depends on the enduring strength, the adaptability, and critically, the internal cohesion of the domestic front. That's the foundation. And right now, that foundation appears to be under considerable strain.